Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining. As you know, I have been in Australia covering the Australian federal election campaign for The Nightly. For the first 2 weeks, I covered Prime Minister Anthony Albanese very closely, and the last week I have been on the bus with the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, who I am very pleased to say is today's guest on the podcast. We have a great chat coming up for you. Peter Dutton is actually the only guest to come on this podcast twice, so very grateful for him putting aside so much time, particularly in the middle of what is such a frenetic campaign. I cannot even tell you what my average hours sleep are these days. I cannot even tell you sometimes what city I'm in. I don't even know. And I also cannot even tell you how many flights and awful plane meals I've had these past 3 weeks. But we're in the final stretch. The election is on May 3. And Mr. Dutton, who polling suggested could have put up a serious and fierce challenge to the governing Labor Party as of about 3 or 4 months ago, is now very firmly on the back foot, and there's not too many polls that predict he will win. So we talked a lot about this context, but also some of the themes that have driven a really big change through this federal election campaign. Obviously, number one is being Donald Trump and how he has just seemed to revitalise both incumbents and centre-left parties right around the world, which is, of course, a huge reversal in the trend that we were seeing up until MAGA entered the White House. So before we get to the interview, just a quick reminder and a quick note from our sponsor. And this episode is sponsored by Political Tours, which is run by the former New York Times and BBC correspondent Nicholas Wood. He is a good friend of this podcast. He came up with the idea of Political Tours when he was a globe-trotting correspondent too, because he thought there'd be travellers like you who would want to roam the world with an interest in current affairs. And rather than just seeing the tourist hotspots, go and meet the movers and shakers and get an understanding of a country's political skin. So they're heading to Taiwan later this year. In June, they head to Ireland. You can go online and find all their trips coming up. Travel intelligently with politicaltours.com. Peter Dutton, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Latika.
Now, I probably wouldn't have opened with this question when I first came to your campaign because, to be honest, it felt like it was a bit low energy vibes. You weren't having a great run. But in the last couple of days, I think I've detected in you this new vigour, a bit of sharpness to you. We're in the home stretch. Where's that come from?
Well, it's come from meeting people who are just amazing. And I think we had a great trip to Townsville to speak to the diggers there, the young diggers in particular, who I think were really proud of their service. And for me, I'm in awe of them when you think they're willing to sacrifice their lives to keep us safe and keep my kids safe. And it's worth spending some time with them and worth having a chat about what's important to them. So I think that was great. But just the individual stories as well. You and I spoke to that lady about housing, and I think some of those things just trigger a reminder of why you're doing what you're doing, and that all of the crap that goes with the job, sometimes it puts all of that into perspective because the bigger picture is worth it. And I think there's an element of that that's fed into the enthusiasm that we've got in the campaign.
So you had a huge lead coming into this campaign. Some coalition supporters might be looking up, just tuning in this week as we go to vote and saying, what happened?
Well, I think there are an enormous number of voters who, and as we're seeing in the private polling, but the published polling as well, who are either undecided or soft voters. So after 3 years, they don't believe that the government, or they're not yet inclined to believe that the government is a solution for them.
But the polls have changed,
yeah,
right?
I think it has. And when you look at the seat-by-seat polling, you see the influence of the local candidate there. We have knocked on more doors, we've made more outbound calls, and we've done more advertising in key seats than at any point in our party's history.
Really?
And for some of those candidates, they've got a name ID, which would normally be somewhat behind a sitting Labor member, an incumbent member, but their name ID is at least as high as the local Labor member. And in some of these seats, they've been traditional Labor strongholds, but the Labor Party's taken it for granted for too long. And as the demographic shift has taken place for us in inner metropolitan seats, the outer metropolitan seats are now families with big mortgages, car repayments, and they are moving away from the Labor Party to the Liberal Party. So I think there is an enormous opportunity for us to come home with the wind at our back and not to underestimate the challenge and accept where some of the sentiment is. But what I'm seeing from our candidates, hearing from our experts on the ground and seeing in our own numbers, it's game on.
So don't write you off?
Don't write us off at all. And I think the Liberal Party was written off in 2019 and the published polling was showing a Labor victory. As you know, the bookies paid out on Bill Shorten. And that's a similar dynamic in my mind to what's happening now. I think there is a big disparity between the big overall overarching numbers that you're seeing in some of the published polling. And there's also not, it's very expensive to poll and there's not there's not the micro sort of attention to seat by seat. But in the end, I think what decides this election is, do people think they're better off after 3 years of Anthony Albanese? Can people afford for grocery prices to go up by another 30%? Gas is up by 34%. Electricity is up by 32%. Can people really afford for those costs to continue to increase? Whereas our plan provides short-term support through the 25 cent a litre reduction in fuel, the $1,200 tax rebate, and then we fix up Labor's mess of the energy system, which is what's causing the cost of everything to go up at the moment.
There's an election before yours. It's in Canada. And Pierre Poilievre didn't have a lead like yours. It was outsized compared to yours, and it's completely disappeared. Is Donald Trump strangling conservatives around the world?
Look, I think if you have a look at the cyclone here in Queensland and then the international events, there's always a distraction and always a diversion. And if you're an incumbent government and you've had a shocker for 3 years and you haven't got a good story to tell, then you latch onto these international events to try and turn that into a distraction. Look at all of the Labor Party advertising. It's all negative. It's not talking about, you know what, you and your kids are much better off by $4,000 today than you were 3 years ago. People are living in household recessions. That's the reality of people's lives now. So yes, I think all of these issues have been latched onto by a Prime Minister who's desperate to talk about anything but his record. And I think Australians are smart enough to see through that. They know that there are two options at this election, and it's not anyone from the United States or Europe or anywhere else. It's Anthony Albanese or myself. That's the choice that the Australian people have to make. And I don't believe that people can afford 3 more years of a bad government, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
I hear what you're saying, and it's interesting. Both you and the Prime Minister are actually very reluctant to say Donald Trump's name out loud. But the truth is, about 3 or 4 months ago, it was a positive dynamic for you. You actually introduced or announced you were going to have your own Doge. You had some ideas like cutting public service numbers, working from home bans, some of these things that Elon Musk and Donald Trump have done. And then all of a sudden they became radioactive for you. So it has changed, hasn't it?
But it's an interesting analysis. It's like saying that government efficiency was invented by the Trump administration. I mean, it's just a nonsense. The biggest influence in my political life has been John Howard and Peter Costello. And I worked very closely with them and as an assistant treasurer. And it's our instinct as small business people and as Liberals to make sure that we're spending taxpayers' money efficiently. So the thought that when we've got the highest per capita of anywhere in the world of public servants, that we wouldn't say, well, is this the most efficient way to spend taxpayers' money, particularly when families are working second and third jobs? I just don't accept the analysis that these ideas were born of President Trump's election and we've adopted the ideas. They're long-standing principles of the Liberal Party, of the National Party, to make sure...
But Doge, that word is a Trumpism.
But that's not a word that we've used. Ours was a government efficiency, which is exactly what John Howard had in place after 96 when they had the Keating mess to clean up. So, and the fact that it's in Prime Minister and Cabinet, it's not its own department. We haven't proposed to bring somebody in from the tech sector, but none of that. I think it'd be a reasonable proposition for you to put the way you have if we had have adopted those elements, but we haven't. What we've said is, look, if you're a nurse and your partner is a mechanic and you're working your guts out and you've had 30% increases in your grocery prices, your insurance is up by 35%, you've taken a part-time shift on a Friday and Saturday night at the local bottle-o or at the local servo, you're doing that just to get by. They expect us to spend money and find where we're not spending money efficiently because they're doing it in their own budget. So I don't think there's anything controversial on that.
Do you think the Make America Great Again movement is conservative? Do you think Donald Trump is a conservative?
No, I don't. I don't. And I think the American politic is obviously very different than it is here. Joe Biden's, a character who has been, I think, a very different person in his later years than what he was in his prime. I think both sides of politics, for different reasons and nuances, have created a dynamic in the United States which is nothing like what it is in Australia. And I think that this election really is about cost of living first and foremost, and people recognise that if you want to deal with cost of living, you need to manage the economy well, and only a Liberal government can do that. But also, I think people are really unsettled about what they're seeing with knife crime in their own neighbourhood, with stolen vehicles, with bail laws, with domestic violence incidents, with the anti-Semitism, with what they've seen in Europe, what they've seen in the Middle East. All of that has created a dynamic where national security is a factor in people's minds at this election as well. So it's not just who do you trust to manage the economy, but also who do you trust to keep us safe in our neighbourhoods, in our communities, and in the region. And that has an undercurrent which I don't think has been picked up by many as well. But certainly our people are reporting it back on the doors that crime is a huge issue in WA and Victoria and New South Wales and elsewhere. And
we should clarify
that is a factor
for overseas listeners, crime is primarily a state-based issue, not a federal one. Just coming back to that, though, if you don't think Donald Trump is a conservative, what do you think he is? What is MAGA in that style of politics?
Well, I just think people can make their own judgments in relation to all of that. I think for us now, 5 or 6 days out from the election, it's about what the choice is here in Australia, and the choice is between a government that hasn't done well, that doesn't want to talk about its record, that has largely just run a slur campaign.
And why haven't you countered this? This is surprising to me. Why didn't you just punch back with your own scare campaign?
I think the view has been that we just don't dignify it or respond to it because people will see through it. Now,
but are they?
Well, people ultimately will make a judgment about that. I think there is an impact first up, and I think that is starting to wane now because I think people see through it. And I think people think, hang on, this guy looks into the camera, this Prime Minister looks into the camera and just flat out lies to me. And actually, the whole basis of their scare campaign around Medicare, for example, the reality is, and people now realise this, that Medicare under this government has seen bulk billing rates fall by 11%. It's actually a con. Medicare was much stronger under a coalition government.
So let's just clear this up, because I've been with the PM for 3 weeks. I'm going back to him this week for the final stretch. And one of the things he keeps saying is, Peter Dutton will cut Medicare to pay for nuclear. I mean, you're laughing. Is that going to happen?
Of course it's not going to happen.
So why don't you just say that? Like, where are the ads saying, I'm not doing this?
Well, because I think you're then playing on their ground, and I think Australians are smarter than that. The figure that they're using of $600 billion is a completely fictitious figure.
Yeah.
It's dreamt up by...
So hang on, John Howard used to... Who was it that banked on the quiet Australians? You're banking on the smart Australians.
We're banking on the smart Australians and the forgotten Australians. And I think this government has had its focus largely on the needs and wants of inner city Greens in Sydney and Melbourne. And the Australians who are out there sitting in traffic for an hour to get to work each morning, an hour and a half to get back in the afternoon, running kids around to sport, all the rest of it, they're the Australians that we're relying on in this election. And I think they know that the Prime Minister's pulled a bit of a Swiftie, that he's pretty loose with the truth, and they know the lived experience of this government over 3 years, and they're smart enough to know that it'll get worse if this government's re-elected.
So one of the big mistakes during this campaign, and I need to bring this up because it relates to a lot of what I focus on, which is international relations, was when you came out and effectively verbaled the Indonesian president. Now, I listened to your Mark Bouris podcast. It was great, by the way, really interesting. But you said in that you would correct the record in a heartbeat if you made a mistake. And actually, when it came to this instance, you had 12 opportunities to say, look, I messed up. And on the 13th opportunity, you did in that live debate. Why did you mess up so badly about something so serious? And can you assure people who are contemplating voting for you on your national security record that you can actually be trusted with these very delicate relationships?
Well, if you look at the relationships that I've fostered over my time in public life, worked very effectively with the Obama administration in relation to protection of children online and many other issues, I might say, that was in the migration and home affairs portfolios. Worked very effectively with the Trump Mark I administration, the West Wing, again around child protection online, but other matters of cybersecurity, etc. in my portfolio responsibility there. I have relationships from both of those administrations still to this day. Worked very closely with the Biden administration, and in terms of my ability to interact with world leaders, I was invited by the Indian Prime Minister to his residence to meet with him. I've met with him on 2 occasions here in Australia as well. I have a very good relationship with the PNG Prime Minister. We have very good relationships with our Japanese counterparts. I am coming to your point, but the broader point in terms of why people should trust me in relation to international relations, I've had 20 years of runs on the board of developing very productive and successful relationships. No government was ever able to deal with the Americans under the Biden administration in the way that the Morrison government did. We had the secrets of the nuclear submarine plan shared with us, which hadn't happened since the 1950s, and we negotiated. That was a hard-fought negotiation, and we dealt over the course of COVID, the distribution of vaccines, of support to countries in our near region. I was responsible for all of the logistics in relation to those matters. So I think that's the actual track record. In relation to President Prabowo, the comments that I made reflected media reports which went to sources inside the Prabowo administration. Now, I wrongly attributed that to the president, but the fact is...
How did that happen?
Well,
it's a pretty serious mistake to make, that's all.
The fact is that the comments had come out of the Prabowo administration, and as it turns out now, instead of focusing on that mistake, the actual focus has started to turn onto the Prime Minister, who it seems has misled the Australian people in terms of what he knew when. Now, if he didn't know that the Russians were making approaches, then that is a catastrophic failure of intelligence here in Australia. The Prime Minister hasn't had any experience in national security matters, and it's been on full demonstration during the period of his prime ministership, right up to this very moment. He's still not truthful about this issue. He's still denied the opposition a briefing in relation to the matter, which in caretaker, I think, is something that reflects very poorly on him, and in contrast to what we did when we were in an election
But can we
campaign.
be assured that that level of mistake, and it was a real clanger, and I know you take this stuff seriously, can we be assured that you won't mess that up again?
Well, again, I think you can look at my record as a whole. And if you look at my record as a whole, it's been to deliver for our country, to build those relationships, to interact with world leaders. And I think I bring probably the most experience in international relations and defence and security to this job than probably anyone else who's contested the role.
I'm going to put a question to you exactly the same that I put to the Prime Minister. Do you think we're a bit more on our own as a result of what's taking place in the United States?
No, I don't. I think the support across the aisle in the United States for Australia and the relationship and ANZUS and AUKUS is without precedent. I think it's stronger even than their relationship with the United Kingdom or with Canada. And
but we've seen how they've sold out Ukraine. Morally good cause, right?
Well, we've seen a circumstance in the Ukraine which, and I thought was appalling at the time, the treatment of President Zelensky in the White House, and I've been very public in relation to that. I think the support for Australia is significant within the administration, from the President himself, and certainly from members of both houses. So I have true confidence, given what we've seen over the course of history, the ability for Republicans and Liberals and Democrats and Labor MPs and Prime Ministers, we've been able to bridge different periods. And there's no question in my mind that as a population of 27 million people on an island in the middle of nowhere, that we need strong partners in an uncertain century. And that means...
But it's not us that's changing, it's them, right?
Well, it means for us, the United States, the United Kingdom, increasingly Japan, India, these are all reliable partners. And our traditional Five Eyes partners, obviously, of Canada and New Zealand, otherwise, they're important compacts. I also think it's a period in history where it's important for like-minded countries to come together and to express a strong view and to condemn the actions of authoritarian regimes and to make sure that we call out bad behaviour, because otherwise, if we don't have that deterrence and red lines keep getting crossed, then that makes it difficult for us to hold the moral authority.
But when the Chinese ships did a lap, it was noticeable that the US administration said nothing. Doesn't that worry you? You've just said it's important we call out as like-minded. They didn't say a word.
Well, I think if you go back to other instances, the RAF flight that was impacted, I don't think the Americans had cause to make comment at that point. I wouldn't read too much into that.
Okay. Is there a world leader at the moment that if you are elected next week, you'll be on the phone to and say, Can you give me some advice?
I've got a good relationship with the New Zealand Prime Minister. I've met
Chris Luxon.
Yeah.
So he's bald and he's the first bald PM. So
see, there's hope for all of us. There's hope for all of us. I've found him very easy to engage with, and I admire that he inherited a really bad economic situation, and he's done his very best to try and deal with it. It's not been easy, and obviously there's a difficult dynamic in that parliament as well. But I think he's overcome all of those odds, and there are some parallels in terms of the Australian situation as well. I think the Labor Party's done a lot of damage to the economy here, and it'll take corrective action to get our country back on track. So I've enjoyed the interaction with Chris, and obviously New Zealand's family, and very much part of our united face for this region.
That's nice. I wouldn't have expected that answer, but it is very heartwarming to hear that. You have spent a lot of time on this campaign trail criticising Kevin Rudd, who is obviously former Prime Minister, now our ambassador in the United States. It appears to me that the bipartisan support for that position is now over. Whether or not you win, is time up for Kevin Rudd?
I wouldn't categorise it in that way. What I've said is that I want Kevin Rudd to succeed because I want Australia to succeed. And it's difficult, though, obviously, if you've got an ambassador who is persona non grata to the administration. And it's hard from opposition because I haven't got the advice from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I don't know the private responses from the West Wing to the Prime Minister or to the ministers. It doesn't seem, though, if I might put it this way, just that there's a problem with Kevin Rudd. It seems that Penny Wong and Richard Marles and Don Farrell have zero relationship with their counterparts as well.
Well, hang on. Richard Marles was over there. He met Pete Hegseth. But whoever knows how long Pete Hegseth will be Defence Secretary.
But look at the.
We were there for Quad for the inauguration.
Look at the decision around the tariffs, right? Well, sure, but those meetings are scheduled, right? The question is...
Well, the Hegseth wasn't. And also, come on, let's be honest. No country has got an exemption for tariffs and he's had to walk them back.
No, but this is not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that there wasn't even a respectful phone call to say, look, just a heads up, we don't want to embarrass you. You're going to see this in the news in 10 minutes or 10 hours or whatever it is. We're not changing our mind, but this is the decision we've made.
Do you think that's an Australia thing or isn't that a Trump thing?
No, I think it's...
Isn't that the way they're treating all of us?
But again, that goes then to every cabinet relationship. So a decision is conveyed through the television screen that's not good for Australia. That I can't think of a precedent for that unless there's a royal snub that's given by the government making the decision. And I think what it goes to is the ineffectiveness and the weakness of the Prime Minister in dealing with these matters, but not only the Prime Minister and not only the ambassador, but if Richard Marles has got such a great relationship, or if Don Farrell's got such a great relationship with his counterpart, surely there would have been a phone call to say, look, Don, we don't know each other well, but we really appreciated the time we've been able to spend together. I just want to give you, out of respect and as a courtesy, a heads up that this announcement's about to come. None of that happened. And I think that demonstrates the lack of preparedness from this government. They didn't believe that President Trump was going to be elected. They put no effort into the relationship at all. And they were caught by surprise, and our country suffered as a result.
If that's the truth, and Kevin Rudd is our man there,
well, again,
how do you stand by his position?
Well, again, I stand by his position because he's the appointed ambassador, and I want him to succeed.
Then why are you attacking him on the campaign trail?
Because I think it's important to point out that part of the government's failure, and don't forget this was a captain's call from the Prime Minister. Penny Wong didn't support this call to appoint Kevin Rudd. I'm sure of that. And you smile but not laugh. But I'm
kind of laughing.
Yeah, laughing on the inside, as many of us did at the time, because it was a captain's call. I think it showed, frankly, a pretty early insight into the weakness of the Prime Minister, because I suspect Kevin Rudd demanded the job and Anthony Albanese wasn't strong enough to say to him, look, you're a friend and I owe you, but I don't think you're the right person for the job. Now, he's in the job and we support him, but I don't have the advice as to whether that relationship is recoverable or appointing him to another term or leaving him there or whatever the scenario might be.
So what would you do?
Well, I'd take advice in terms of whether the relationship is recoverable, whether it's functioning and we just don't know it. There's no evidence of that. And I think you would look at the circumstances.
Okay, 2 final questions. Tony Abbott was the last Liberal leader to bring the opposition into majority government. He took 2 goes to do it. Is that going to be a similar scenario for you?
I've never had a 2-term strategy. Our strategy's always been to win in 1 term, and I've always believed and still do.
Don't?
Well, you can only focus on this year's grand final, and that's where we're at, and we're a few days out from it. And the focus now is how can we convey our message that we are much more effective at managing the economy and therefore helping cost of living pressures. How do we convey our message that we are a safer pair of hands in relation to national security? That's been the focus. I think that message is cutting through. I think Australians know that our plan is to deliver short-term support through the 25 cent a litre cut in fuel and $1,200 tax rebate, and then introduce what is a very significant change to bringing more of our gas that we're exporting into domestic supply. That drops the price of wholesale gas by 23%. It has an economy-wide effect of bringing prices down, and that means groceries are cheaper. It means everything that you're buying in your household budget is cheaper. Construction costs, because building materials go down, they all come down.
Okay, but
that's
your mountain
what,
to climb is huge, right? Because of the decimation that Scott Morrison led you guys to at the last election. We all know the history. Australians usually give governments a second go, even if they're pretty crap. So if you don't get over the line, do you want another go?
Latika, I only have an eye for Saturday and for Saturday night's outcome. I believe that we can win the election, and I believe the hurt and the pain that this government's put people through will mean that those people in outer metro areas, in Victoria and New South Wales, in Perth, in Brisbane, in Tassie, and in the Northern Territory where we were yesterday, I think those people are going to vote for change. And I do believe that we can win the election. And I believe that we must, because we need to make the decisions that will help families recover from this period. The fact that we've had more small businesses close over the last 12 months than in any 12-month period in our history demonstrates how bad this government is. But it goes well beyond that. And I believe that we can convey that message effectively to the people. I think we're doing that now. And I think we can win on Saturday, but we've got a 24/7 fight over every day between now and then.
And just final question. I know you're going to indulge this just because you're kind.
It's a fair preamble.
So the last time we chatted, you spoke a bit about being bald. To my surprise, actually. Since then, you've acquired these spectacles. Are these real?
I'm deteriorating. They are. They are, right?
What's your prescription grade? Because there's a bit of a rumour that they're not quite real. And you've done it to improve your image.
You can try them on if you like.
Can I?
You can. I can't read properly without them. I don't need them for distance. Like, I can walk without them, but I was putting them on and off constantly all day. But I can't, even if I'm eating food, actually, I put them on.
What, you're that blind?
Well, I don't know that I'm that blind, but like it is sort of a blur. It's a clearer picture if I've got the glasses on, but I don't need them to see across the room. So, but putting them on and off drove me crazy. So I've got like a bifocal or trifocal, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now.
So it's not a image makeover.
No, there's not much that can help to make over my image. It is what it is. The genes are there. So, so the hearing is holding up okay in terms of the next faculties, but it's only a matter of time, I presume. But I'm 54 this year. I just feel much older and look much older. But I've had almost 25 years in the Parliament, and I'm proud of the career that I've had. I have incredible support around me in terms of my family and my staff.
Yeah, it's been nice seeing them on the trail. Actually.
Yeah, it's been really nice to share.
Sweet.
Been nice to share it with them because they've got.
Don't you feel a bit like guilty putting them in the limelight though? Harry got attacked asking about whether you'd support him to buy a house.
Yeah, but he also got called Brad Pitt online, which he was pretty happy with.
Did he really?
The post was that he looked like Brad Pitt and I looked like Mr. Potato Head, so he was pretty happy with that post. But look, no, we've always said to the kids, you want to be in the photo, you don't want to be in the photo, you want to do that interview, you don't want to do it, whatever, you make the call. And they're quite invested actually, and it's we're a very close family, and I think they have a lot of pride. They went through the leadership battle in 2018, and I think they felt the emotion of that. None of them are really interested in politics, but we've always been there for each other. It is, and I think they want to be there. I remember Anne Peacock talking at her father's funeral about her memories of travelling with her father when Andrew was opposition leader during the campaign, and those memories had stayed with her. And so it's also nice. It's just a normal part of the day when you can come back to the hotel room instead of being there by yourself to sit down and have a beer with one of the boys or a glass of wine with Beck or Kira-Lee. And instead of just checking in and out of a hotel every night for 36 nights, it's nice to have them there for dinner or for on the plane to have a conversation, because otherwise,
Yeah, I don't think people
you miss
understand
them.
how lonely politics can be, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. They're long hours, and it's incredibly rewarding when you can do good things and make decisions that impact positively on people. But yeah, there's that absence. I've always said I just don't understand how people in the Australian Defence Force can be posted for 6 or 9 months away from their kids, and that would just kill me. Being away a week at a time when Parliament's sitting, you can sort of cope with, but a month's too long for me. So I've enjoyed the travel together, and that's made it easier for me to do my job. So yeah, they're great kids. I'm very lucky.
Okay, you just reminded me of one more thing. Sorry, I know I'm pushing the friendship. 5% GDP on defence, as Gina Reinhart wants. Should we be taxing her to pay for that?
We've said that we want to invest more into defence because the Prime Minister rightly says, and he's had the intelligence briefings I had as Defence Minister, and in fact the intelligence briefings I've had as opposition leader, whilst not as detailed obviously as the Prime Minister would receive, tell me that the situation's deteriorated even more over the last 3 years. The Prime Minister says we live in the worst period, the most precarious period since 1945, the end of the Second World War. And then they take money, $80 billion out of defence.
I know, but 3% is not going to do it either.
Well, we put $21 billion over the next 5 years into defence, and we also streamline the process by which they make the decisions to acquire the capability so that we spend money more efficiently in the budget that's in the budget already.
Europe's going north of 3 now.
Well, we've said that over a 10-year period we can get to 3%, which is what Kim Beazley advocates. Of course, every department, every agency...
But do you think we can defend ourselves where we're at?
With our partners and allies, we can keep ourselves safe and we can preserve peace. And
even at this level now?
Even the capabilities that we have now, I think, are probably underestimated by some Australians. And there's a capability of our SAS, capabilities within even our Collins-class submarine, working with the US and our allies now. We contribute and punch well above our weight, but we've got to make an investment. And when the government agreed with us over the AUKUS deal, the fact that they haven't put any money into the budget to pay for it is what's done the damage. And so the $21 billion that we put in when they're cutting $80 billion does make a big difference. But as I said before, we're small...
But is Gina Reinhart's right, though, isn't she? We do need more than 3, really.
We need to make sure that we invest more. I don't know what the magic number is. And arbitrary figures of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6% sort of become a moot point. The point is, how much money do you require to achieve X capability in Y time? And that's the picture that you can put together in government. It's not the picture that the government has painted over the last 3 years because they've taken money from defence and put it into other priorities. And I think that is absolutely contemptible in the circumstances that we find ourselves in our region, but globally as well. And so with that advice, I think you need to bring in industrialists and others who have delivered big programs and presided over big procurements and building projects, etc., to make sure that we have the most efficient processes of acquiring that defence equipment or capability or infrastructure. We put about $10 billion into Operation Red Spice when I was Defence Minister, which is about securing our defences against cyber attack. So the advice I always received was that Australia would know it was under attack when our energy system was disrupted, when the telecommunication system was shut down, when GPS or timing was shut off. And this is where AUKUS Pillar 2 comes in. The satellites and space and the work that we do there with the Americans, the support that we provide through Pine Gap, etc., all of that is absolutely essential. And it's why Australia is a very strong and significant partner. And I think we can contribute in a net way, in a net positive way, to our allies, and that's where we can add value. And that's why they'll continue to support us and to defend us, and that is the best way that we can keep our country safe.
Okay, you need to hit the campaign trail.
Okay.
And I need to hit it with you, but I could talk for you forever about this. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Great to catch up again. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.